one of the, perhaps the biggest reason why I'm so bullish on crypto is because it's, I believe it's something like a miracle, that it is a miracle, that it will come to be, in that it, it isn't just going to be a disruption of legacy banking and financial systems and freedom from capital controls, which and which leads to freedom of speech, because freedom to purchase is freedom of speech. Purchasing, the act of purchasing is, in a sense, speech, as has been argued by others. But more than that, I believe crypto will come to unleash or unshackle true human potential. If you consider that currently we see perhaps 1 to 5% of human potential, human productivity, human creativity, human ingenuity is online, is active, is engaged. And if you really think about it, if you consider all of the world's population with all of the intellectual capital throughout, across the world, and you consider how much of it is engaged in productive and activity in truth seeking, in research, in experimentation activities, and you really think about it, it probably is a very low percentage, and that's exciting to think that there is perhaps something coming that will unleash maybe up to, who knows, 80%. There will always be places in the world where things just aren't working out, and that will perhaps continue to be the majority, a large part of the world's population. But if we're at something like 1%, 1 to 5%, what we would call it a productivity rate or something like that, and you consider that there is something coming that I believe could get us, if we were able to get to something like 80%, we're talking cures for cancer, time travel, things that might not actually be good for us, such as cybernetic implants and the extension of lifespans, etc. The value and the merits and value of those developments are debatable. But why? In getting there, part of the process by which we would get to this kind of unleashing of potential would be for there to be the elimination of politicians, so that human ambition and preference can express itself unencumbered. I didn't realize I was starting to shoot with the construction zone right there. I'm gonna pause and start and continue on the other beach. Okay, and so we will need to explore the process by which, well, that's the purpose of this video, is to talk about how it is that we could actually see a future without politicians. So to figure out how we would get there, we need to consider what it is that this arrangement, what exactly is the arrangement that we have, and what are the important factors that make it possible, and what are the constraints, and then we can explore the reasons why we have had the need for politicians historically. So what it is essentially, we have to think about it a little bit in the abstract to get some concepts on the table. So it's politics is an arrangement whereby a citizenry appoints leadership to enact by way of policy making the expressed preference of the citizenry. And the best we have been able to do so far has been what we have today. And just as an aside, when we're talking about politics, the doing away of it, or the existing systems, legacy systems, the disruption of these systems, we're only considering what would be considered to be the closest form of legitimate government and legitimate politics. We're not talking about totalitarian, authoritarian, mafia network regimes. We're talking essentially about the United States, because that's the closest thing in the world, because of our glorious Constitution and our First Amendment and Second Amendment, for that matter, that represents the most legitimate, despite the flaws and the gross manipulations and misappropriations and molestation, not molestations, but despite the problems with the United States system of governance, that's what we're talking about. We're not talking about this horse shit. So it's a system whereby we appoint leadership to enact by way of policy making the express preference of the citizenry. And the best so far that we have been able to do is what we would call in finance or business management, we talk about lumpy revenues as opposed to smooth revenues that come in big chunks. Well, our system of voting is quite lumpy, because unless you participate in like these regional proposal elections, like in local county elections, you have vote on, or statewide elections, vote on proposal A. You have those kinds of things. Unless you engage in that kind of thing, which I don't. I just voted in the midterm elections, and I didn't vote this time because I had given up. And thank God Trump was elected. Thank God for him. But I will certainly be voting going forward, because we have more than just hope at this point to look forward. Our election system is quite lumpy, and there are reasons why. Even if you participate in local, county, or city or state election events, it's still lumpy. And what I'm going to be moving this talk towards and discussing at length is how it is increased granularization of our expression of preference that will ultimately lead towards there to be no longer a need for politicians. So first of all, but that's getting ahead of ourselves. To first discuss why it is that we have been, for the entire 20th century and continuing today, why it is that we've been bound by this system of lumpy expression of preference, where it's not just lumpy, it's blunt, it's imprecise and blunt, right? You are placing you're delegating your expression of, you're delegating the pursuit and the defense of your interests to another person who's you believe to have ideals, a belief system, values that match your own to the best extent possible. That is essentially what we are doing when we vote. So it's blunt and imprecise. And again, there are reasons why. And the reasons why that we need to just basically, detail are related to the costs, the costs related to these legacy processes, the actual mechanics of how this gets done. And when we start to look at those and then we compare what can be done with blockchain-based governance, possibilities open up. So, it kind of helps move the talk forward to talk a little bit about why it is that we haven't been able to put things in place that cause. What we're essentially looking forward to is that every action we take, every purchase action, every choice of where we locate our corporeal forms, in other words, where we go every day, where we choose to go every day to spend our precious time, that each of those actions and choices gets translated into a vote. Why it is that we have thus far not been able to utilize the data that comes from those activities, despite having it be collected in recent years, is necessary to detail. So that is what gets us to a place where we no longer need to delegate the pursuit and defense of our interests to other human beings that are responsible for somehow doing so for large numbers of people whose interests differ. It has already been discussed why politicians are so ineffective. So just as a quick aside, the reason is essentially because of the distance between them and, what do you call it, their constituency, those that they represent, the citizenry. Because of the costs and constraints and barriers to extreme granularization of collection of preference and enaction of the preference by way of capital allocation or policy making, along with the distance. The distance has to do with the fact that there's one politician that's responsible for doing all of these things, handling all of these things on behalf of just too many people. It's not, you would expect in that kind of a one-to-many arrangement that things would be of particularly low precision. And so, where were we? Maybe back to the hope, or the optimal, an optimal arrangement would be a system wherein as I said, every action, every activity, every purchase, every choice of where to locate yourself locally or internationally is translated into data, a piece of data that's applied to pursue in order such that your interests are either pursued or defended. And let's talk about why we, despite having those systems that are capable of doing them now, why we can't use them. It's essentially because of security. In recent years, we are able to collect those kinds of activities, the data for those associated with those activities. However, due to the centralized collection and storage methods in place, they cannot be used, and they especially cannot be used for an election. But due to the prohibitively difficult to hack levels of security afforded by blockchain, the storage of information, the signing and storage of information onto blockchain, we will be able to use all of that data. We will build systems that, when we choose to allow for the signing of the information associated with our activities onto the blockchain by way of by cryptographically allowing them to be signed onto one or more blockchains using our private keys, we will be able to use all of this data, and that's such a big deal. It will allow us to get so much. It will allow nations, it will allow teams and companies, cities of people, nations of citizenries to get a level of clarity on what is actually needed for them to be healthy and fulfilled to a much greater extent. The level of clarity on those matters will be so much greater due to the quantity and quality of the data that is collected. Currently, we have all kinds of reward systems, and Google has, and Facebook, and the likes of them have all of these systems of collecting all of these things already, and have for, those systems have been really mature for maybe 5 or 6 years. That's long enough for them to be otherwise able to be utilized, but they aren't. So how does that actually eliminate the need for politicians? Let's explore that a little bit. If there is the need for if there's perhaps the need for there to be, for example, a new bridge built locally, then, or some kind of a change in the city layout, then there can be a smart contract that's developed to make the decision according to the information collected on the choices the local people are making in their travel patterns. And so in that scenario, we would not need for there to be a panel of experts such as local city councilmen who, after taking all of their bribes and satisfying their donors in various ways, assuming that they don't even do that, for a panel of councilmen or whatever to be making decisions based on the intellectual capital represented by their big 5-person group, when you compare that with the quality of decision making that can be made based on the collection of thousands of people's daily movements and choices, that group of 5 city councilmen become obsoleted. So that's on somewhat of a small scale, but I think it's a good example. It may not, no, I think we eventually will have, I haven't even considered really how far this thing is going to go as to whether or not it will eliminate the need for an actual president, or what do they call them in other places, prime ministers. But this is the direction that I see things going, and I predict that we are going to see, as a result of this, a new era for humanity that is extremely bright compared to what we've seen. Yeah. I think I'm going to save my talk on how we absolutely must. Blockchain, it's not that blockchain must succeed, it already has, but I'm going to save my talk on why it must, due to the fact that the systems by which information can be so easily used, so effectively used to enact policy for the good or suffering of populations has become so developed in the past 20 years that it's actually, despite the utility that it offers, it is offering now a level of danger that's so much greater than anything ever before. I'm gonna dig into that next time. Hope this was helpful.